"Get your hands off that door, sweetheart. That operating room is for medical professionals, not for people like you." The words cracked across the surgical floor of St. Augustine Memorial Hospital like a slap. Nurse Patricia Whitmore stepped forward, snatched the worn cloth cap out of the black woman's hands, held it up between two fingers like it was something dead, and dropped it straight into the biohazard bin. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She looked Patricia dead in the eyes and said quietly, "May I have my cap back, please?" Nobody moved, nobody spoke. 12 nurses, 2 residents, an anesthesiologist, frozen. Patricia had no idea who this woman really was. She had no idea that in exactly 94 minutes every surgeon on that floor would freeze in place when this same woman scrubbed in, walked into operating room 3 and held out her hand for the scalpel. She had just made the biggest mistake of her 22-year career. Have you ever been judged before you said a single word? Hold that thought. Let me take you back. 3 hours earlier. It was 4:15 in the morning, and the city was still dark when a red-eye flight from Minneapolis touched down on the wet runway. Seat 34B, economy by the window, not first class, not business, held a 56-year-old woman in faded jeans, a gray cardigan with a loose thread at the cuff, and sneakers that had seen at least 400 miles of hospital corridors. Her name was Naomi. She carried one small bag. Inside it, a change of clothes, a thermos, a paperback with a cracked spine, and one object she never let out of her sight. A surgical scrub cap. Hand-stitched, faded blue cotton with tiny white flowers, the pattern worn nearly invisible after decades of washing. And in the corner, embroidered in careful, uneven thread, 2 initials, RC. She held that cap the way some people hold a rosary. But what nobody on that flight knew, not the man snoring beside her, not the flight attendant who offered her pretzels, was why a hospital 4 states away had paid $80,000 to put this particular woman on this particular plane. Because across town on the 4th floor of St. Augustine Memorial, a 9-year-old boy named Eli Brennan was sleeping with a machine watching his heart. Eli loved dinosaurs. He loved his dog, a beagle named Waffles. He loved his mother's pancakes on Sunday mornings, the ones with the crispy edges. And buried in the wall of Eli's aorta, the great vessel that carries blood from the heart to the entire body, was a defect so rare, so dangerous, that the surgeons at St. Augustine had stood around his scans in silence. Dr. Alan Reyes, the chief of surgery, a man with 26 years and 11,000 operations behind him, had looked at that scan for a long, long time. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. "There's only one person who does this." The board had argued about the cost. $80,000 for 1 consult, 1 operation. Reyes ended the argument with a single sentence, then explained to his mother why we let him die over a wire transfer. The surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. sharp. The window was narrow. Eli's vessel wall was thinning by the day, and his last scan had shown a change the cardiologist didn't like. 7 o'clock. Remember that number. Because at 5:30 that morning when Naomi stepped off the elevator onto the surgical floor, there were exactly 90 minutes left on a clock that Patricia Whitmore didn't even know was ticking. Now let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia Whitmore had been charge nurse of the surgical floor for 11 years, and at St. Augustine her word was weather. When Patricia was pleasant, the floor was pleasant. When Patricia was cruel, and she often was, people looked at their shoes and said nothing. The young nurses had a saying they only whispered in the supply room: "You don't report Patricia, you survive her." Why didn't anyone report her? Oh, they did. That's the part that should make your blood boil. 14 complaints in 9 years. 14. A nursing student reduced to tears in front of a patient's family. A Filipino transport tech mocked for his accent until he transferred to another hospital. An elderly black housekeeper named Miss Dorothy, accused of stealing a phone that Patricia later found in her own coat pocket. No apology ever offered. 14 complaints, every single one of them filed, stamped, and quietly buried. Buried by whom? By human resources, who answered to administration, who answered to the board. And on that board, in the 3rd chair from the left, sat a silver-haired man named Gerald Whitmore, Patricia's uncle. The system wasn't broken. The system was working exactly as it was built to work, protecting its own. Patricia wore her authority like jewelry. She called the young nurses girls. She called the residents children. And for certain people, you know exactly the people I mean, she had a special voice, sweet on top, acid underneath. Sweetheart. Honey. You people. Hold on to that phrase. People like you. You're going to hear it again, and the 3rd time you hear it, it's going to be on the news. Meanwhile, across the city, Naomi's taxi hummed through the empty streets. She did what she always did before an operation. She didn't review notes. The scans were already living in her mind in 3 dimensions, the way a pianist carries a concerto. Instead, she unzipped her bag, took out the faded blue cap and pressed it flat against her knee, smoothing the wrinkles with her palm, slowly, gently, the way you iron a wedding dress. She traced the 2 embroidered letters with her thumb. R.C. "Almost time, Mama," she whispered. The taxi driver glanced in the mirror but said nothing. Some moments you don't interrupt. She arrived at 5:28 a.m. She always came early, hours early. It was her ritual, as fixed as sunrise. Walk the operating room alone, in silence, before anyone else arrived. Learn where the light fell. Count the steps from the table to the door. Stand in the stillness and let the room become hers. She had done it more than 4,000 times in 30 years. She wasn't about to skip it for the most dangerous operation of the year. She rode the elevator to the 4th floor in her jeans and her gray cardigan, carrying her small bag, holding the cap softly in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. The doors opened, and Patricia Whitmore looked up from the nurse's station. What happened in the next 19 minutes was witnessed by 14 people. One of them was a 24-year-old nurse named Janelle Okafor, 3 months out of nursing school, standing by the medication cart with her phone in her pocket. Remember Janelle, because what Janelle did with that phone would eventually be seen by 11 million people. Naomi walked toward the double doors of operating room 3 with the calm of someone who belonged. Patricia's chair scraped back. Excuse me. Where do you think you're going?" Naomi turned, polite as a Sunday morning. "Good morning. I'm here for the 7 o'clock aortic case. I'd like to walk the OR before the team arrives." Patricia's eyes went down. Jeans, sneakers, cardigan with the loose thread. Then back up, and something settled in her face. A verdict, reached in 2 seconds, beyond appeal. "Honey, the cafeteria's on the 1st floor. Visiting hours start at 9. "I'm not a visitor. I'm here for the surgery." The surgery. Patricia laughed, actually laughed, and looked around to collect an audience. "Sweetheart, do you have any idea what's happening in that room this morning? We have a specialist flying in, a world-renowned surgeon. This floor is closed to everyone who isn't essential personnel." "I understand," Naomi said. "If you check the schedule, you'll see—" "I wrote the schedule." Patricia's voice dropped into that special register. Sweet on top, acid underneath. "Let me guess. Housekeeping sent you up early? Or are you with the family? Either way, you need to turn around and get back on that elevator because people like you do not walk into my operating room." There it was, the second time. A resident by the supply closet opened his mouth and closed it. The anesthesiologist studied his clipboard like it held scripture. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. 14 people, and not one of them said the 6 words that would have ended it. "Maybe you should check her name." Naomi took a slow breath. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you respectfully to call Dr. Reyes." "Dr. Reyes?" Patricia's eyebrows climbed. "You want me to wake the chief of surgery. For you." She stepped closer, and that's when her hand swung, whether she meant it or not. 14 witnesses would later disagree, and caught the paper cup. Hot coffee leapt across Naomi's cardigan, soaked through to her skin, splashed the floor. Naomi gasped, just once, just air, and steadied herself on the wall. "Now look at this mess," Patricia said, loud for the audience. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Security to the 4th floor, please." She keyed the intercom like she was ordering breakfast, and then she saw the cap, the faded blue cap with the white flowers clutched in Naomi's coffee-splashed hand. Patricia plucked it away before Naomi could react, held it up between 2 fingers, turned it in the fluorescent light. "And what?" she said. "Is this rag? You were going to walk into a sterile surgical suite with this dishcloth?" She read the initials and smirked. "R.C., let me guess, Goodwill." "Please," Naomi said, and for the first time something moved beneath her calm, not anger, something older and deeper. "Please give that back. My mother made it." Patricia looked her dead in the eyes, and she dropped the cap into the biohazard bin, the red bin, the contaminated bin, the bin whose contents are incinerated, and let the lid clap shut. "Your mother," Patricia said, "should have taught you to know your place." Silence. Total. The kind of silence that has a temperature. Janelle Okafor's hand was already in her pocket. Her phone was already recording. It had been recording for 4 minutes. 2 security guards stepped off the elevator at 5:49 a.m., and Naomi, coffee-stained, empty-handed, surrounded, did not shout, did not cry. She stood up straight, folded her hands in front of her, and looked at the red bin where 60 years of love sat among the contaminated waste. She said very quietly, "All right. If you've ever wondered what power actually looks like, it looks like that. Stillness. While the loud woman in the expensive blazer dug her own grave with a smile on her face, the quiet woman in the coffee-stained cardigan simply waited. Because Naomi knew something Patricia didn't. She knew what time it was. But what Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, begins 60 years earlier in a small kitchen in Greenwood, Mississippi, with a woman named Ruth. Ruth Carter. R.C. In 1968, Ruth Carter was 19 years old, the smartest girl in her county, and she wanted one thing in this world, to be a nurse. She filled out the application to the nursing school in Jackson by hand, 3 drafts, until every letter stood up straight. Her pastor wrote her a recommendation. Her mother sold 2 laying hens to cover the application fee, $1.90 for the postage and the photograph, $1.90. The rejection letter came back in 11 days. It didn't mention her grades, it didn't have to. In 1968, in that place, the answer was already written before she ever asked the question. So Ruth did what unbreakable people do. She walked into the county hospital and took the only job they would give her. Pushing a mop, emptying bins, changing linens, nurse's aide they called it when they called her anything at all. And for 31 years Ruth Carter cleaned the floors of a hospital that wouldn't let her heal anyone in it. But here's what they never understood about Ruth. You can keep a woman out of the classroom. You cannot keep the classroom out of the woman. She watched everything. She listened to everything. When the hospital threw out an old, water-stained copy of Gray's Anatomy, Ruth carried it home like treasure. And at the kitchen table under a lamp with a paper shade, she opened that book in front of her little daughter and said the words that built everything that came after. They closed the door on me, baby, so you're going to walk through it. And when you do, you're going to hold it open. Every night. Bones one winter, the heart the next spring. A child of 7 tracing the chambers of the human heart with her finger, while her mother quizzed her between shifts, still smelling of bleach and floor wax. The neighbors thought Ruth was strange. Let them think it. The daughter's name was Naomi. Naomi, who got the scholarship. Naomi, who opened the letter from Johns Hopkins on the porch while Ruth held the railing and wept into her apron. And that night, this is the part that should stay with you, Ruth went into her closet and took down her one good Sunday dress, the blue one with the little white flowers, the dress she'd been married in, the dress she'd buried her own mother in, and she cut it apart. She stayed up until 4 a.m. with a needle and thread, and she sewed her Sunday dress into a surgical cap. In the corner she embroidered her own initials, R.C., so that in her words, when you're standing over somebody's open heart and your hands get tired, you'll remember whose hands you came from. Naomi wore that cap in her first operation, and her 100th, and her 4,000th. She wore it through residency, where she was the only black woman in her program. She wore it the night she stayed at the table for 19 hours and saved a senator's daughter. She wore it in Boston, in Houston, in Geneva, in Nairobi. She wore it the morning she performed a repair so new, so impossible, that the journals had to give it a name, and they named it after her. There are surgeons on 4 continents who learned that procedure from a textbook chapter she wrote. Medical students highlight her name with yellow markers. Ruth lived to see all of it. She passed in 2019, in her sleep, in a house Naomi built her, with that old water-stained Gray's Anatomy on the nightstand. At the funeral, Naomi didn't put flowers on the casket. She laid her hand on it and she made one promise. The door stays open, Mama, as long as I'm breathing. That cap was the last piece of Ruth Carter's hands left on this earth. And at 5:51 a.m., it was sitting in a biohazard bin, on top of contaminated gauze, because a woman named Patricia decided that a black woman in a cardigan couldn't possibly belong. Now, go back in your mind to the moment Naomi first reached the doors of Operating Room 3, the moment before Patricia ever opened her mouth. Watch Naomi's hands. One holds coffee, the other holds the cap, cradled against her body, thumb resting on those initials. She wasn't carrying a piece of cloth onto that floor, she was carrying her mother. Watch it again when this is over, you'll never see that scene the same way twice. At 6:02 a.m. the security guards were politely asking Naomi to come downstairs and sort this out in the lobby. At 6:02 a.m. Eli Brennan's mother was kissing his forehead in pre-op, and at 6:02 a.m. Dr. Alan Reyes stepped off the elevator with 2 cups of good coffee, ready to greet the one person on earth who could save that boy. He heard Patricia before he saw her. And when the actual surgeon arrives, I will personally— Where is she? Reyes asked. Patricia turned, mid-sentence. Where is who, doctor? Dr. Carter. Her flight landed 2 hours ago. Her car dropped her here at 5:28. Where is she? You could hear the air change. Patricia's mouth opened. The only person who came up was... Her eyes went, slowly, against their will, to the woman in the coffee-stained cardigan standing between two security guards. And the woman in the cardigan stepped forward, extended her hand to Reyes and said in the same calm voice she'd used all morning, "Dr. Naomi Carter, cardiothoracic surgery. I believe you have a 9-year-old with an aortic wall defect, and I believe we're now behind schedule." For 3 full seconds nobody on that floor breathed. Then the whispers started. A second-year resident, the same one who had opened his mouth and closed it, went pale and said out loud to no one, "Carter, that's the Carter technique. She wrote the chapter. She wrote the actual chapter." One of the security guards stepped back like the floor was hot. The anesthesiologist closed his eyes. And Patricia Whitmore, Patricia, who wrote the schedule, who ran the floor, whose word was weather, went white. Not pale, white. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug, and her hand rose halfway to her throat and just hung there. No, she never said she was... She asked you to check the schedule, Janelle Okafor said quietly, from beside the medication cart. The first words anyone had dared. Twice. I have it on video. Reyes looked at the coffee stain, the empty hands, the 2 guards, then at the red bin, where a corner of faded blue cotton was just visible under the lid. He understood all of it in about 4 seconds, and what crossed his face was something between rage and grief. "Dr. Carter, I don't have the words to..." "You don't need words," Naomi said. "You need to get me scrubs. We have a boy waiting, and his aorta does not care about any of this." She paused at the red bin, looked at it for one long moment. "After," she said softly. "First him." At 6:40, she walked the OR alone, in silence, the way she always did. At 6:55, she scrubbed in, hands and forearms. 3 minutes, the old way, the thorough way. The way her mother had described from watching through doorways for 31 years. A scrub tech offered her a standard disposable cap, holding it out with both hands like an apology from the whole building. And at 7:02 a.m., Dr. Naomi Carter stepped up to the table in operating room 3 in front of a gallery now silently filling with every surgeon in the hospital who had found a reason to be there, looked down at the small sleeping boy and held out her hand. Scalpel. The room froze. 1 heartbeat of pure electric stillness, and then it moved around her like an orchestra finding its conductor. 6 hours and 11 minutes. That's how long it took. 6 hours and 11 minutes of hands so steady the monitors seemed calm just watching them. Residents would talk about it for years, the economy of every motion, the silence, the moment near the 4th hour when the vessel wall tore at the edge and the whole room clenched and Naomi simply said, "There you are," like she'd been expecting it, and fixed it. At 1:13 p.m. she stepped back from the table and said the only sentence Eli's mother would remember from that entire day, "He's going to grow up." But the story wasn't over. What happened next would shake that hospital to its foundation. Because while Naomi was inside operating room 3 saving Eli Brennan's life, Janelle Okafor was sitting in her car in the parking garage, hands shaking, watching 4 minutes of video over and over. She thought about the saying from the supply room, "You don't report Patricia, you survive her." She thought about Miss Dorothy, accused of stealing. She thought about 14 complaints. Buried. Then she thought about a woman saying, "Please give that back. My mother made it." Janelle pressed upload. By dinner time, the video had 400,000 views. By the next morning, 3 million. By the end of the week, 11 million people had watched Patricia Whitmore drop Ruth Carter's cap into a biohazard bin and say, "Your mother should have taught you to know your place." 11 million people heard, "People like you do not walk into my operating room." And then 11 million people watched the follow-up clip, security footage the hospital was legally forced to release, of that same woman in the coffee-stained cardigan walking into that same operating room and saving a child's life. The internet gave it a name. #SheWrote the textbook. For 9 days, it trended in 14 countries. Surgeons posted photos of their own copies of her chapter, her name highlighted in yellow. A nursing school in Jackson, Mississippi, the same school that rejected a 19-year-old named Ruth Carter in 1968, posted a public apology 58 years too late and announced a full scholarship in her name before the week was out. And St. Augustine Memorial? St. Augustine caught fire, the legal kind. Patricia was suspended within 24 hours, not because the hospital suddenly found its conscience, because the phones wouldn't stop. Donors were calling, the state nursing board was calling. 3 separate news networks were standing on the lawn. The The hospital's first statement called it an unfortunate misunderstanding between staff members. That statement lasted 6 hours before the internet tore it apart because you cannot call it a misunderstanding when the video shows a woman asking, twice, politely, for the schedule to be checked. Then came the audit. An outside law firm, brought in under pressure from the state, pulled 9 years of personnel files.